October 27th, Transportation and Circulation Committee meeting. 5:33, kick it off and initiate roll call.
Andreas Malavos.
Here.
Hillary Blackerby.
Here.
Kathleen Rodriguez. Here. Susan Horn. Here. Eve Sanford.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, if there's any changes or modifications to the agenda.
Chair Malavos, no changes to tonight's agenda.
Okay. And then next up is a public comment opportunity.
We have one person for public comment, Barry Remus.
Good evening, Chair Malavos and committee members. Thank you. My name is Barry Remus, and I'm here representing Move Santa Barbara County, formerly SB Bike Plus Coast. What's not on your agenda tonight, but I wanted to address with you is one time another reminder about the importance of considering, and I believe that you know, while it may not be your purview to control the interim operations on State Street at this time, you do have the ability to hopefully send a unified message to the mayor and city council and city administrators, echoing the public comment that the State Street Advisory Committee received before their last meeting in August, from several members of the public about the value of bicycling on State Street, and to be able to still allow that opportunity. While we do acknowledge that the speed of e-bikes on State Street is an issue that needs to be addressed, and finding the balance between all forms of human movement. Like we said at the State Street Advisory Committee, if we're going through a master planning process And one of the key goals is to revitalize and form a community space that's meant for people, including housing downtown. Just think about what we'd be losing if we didn't have the ability for people who step outside their apartment, especially considering the new statewide, the new California act that has just been passed that removes parking requirements for downtowns and new developments that are near transit. So it would seem kind of silly to not be able to allow bicycling and other wheeled movement on State Street, but we realize that there's a balance that needs to be struck, and we would hope that in the event or the aftermath of the somewhat surprising removal of the green bike markings along State Street, that you would think hard about it and maybe consider sending a unified message or a statement to the mayor and city council that state that you'd like to see the maintenance of bicycling access in a safe way to continue along State Street, and that we don't see this as the foreshadowing of any further drastic measures to be taken. And we do look forward to continuing to work with both the State Street Advisory Committee, MIG, and the consultant team, as well as you all, to be able to find that good balance of people harmony along State Street in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there anyone else via webinar?
There are no further public comment at this time.
Great. So next up is consent and motion to approve meeting minutes from October 25th.
I'd move to approve.
Changes. I'm sorry. I'll second, but I have a couple of minor corrections to suggest. On the, actually it relates to what Mr. Remus was just talking about. The last meeting in committee comments, committee member Rodriguez, that's me, expressed safety concerns with e-bikes being used by youth. I think I'd like that to be expanded to say specifically cycling rapidly near pedestrians. I thought that was the point I wanted to make. So I'll give you these. I have them in red ink. I'll give them to you, so don't worry. So that's the one. And then the other one, I think if I read this correctly, on the State Street Promenade update, in committee comments, Vice Chair Blackerby expressed the need to do additional outreach to the community regarding the State Street Master Plan. Committee member Rodriguez raised her concerns about a consultant doing the work without input. Mr. Bossy advised that the State Street Master Plan will involve many opportunities for community input. Committee member Horn recommended that the input should be received by the public, and I think that should have said from the public. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay, from the public rather than solely from business owners. So, and then the rest is fine. Thought that was an important clarification.
So I'd move approval with those changes.
Okay. So moved.
Is there a second?
I think there was a second.
I already
Kathleen.
seconded, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, the motion passes. And Chair Malavos, we actually skipped over the announcements, and I wanted to.
Oh, sorry.
It was fine. So I have a couple of two announcements, and also Committee Member Blackerby has an announcement as well. So the first announcement that I wanted to share is that for a couple of committee members, this is their last meeting, and it is Committee Member Eve Sanford and Committee Member Susan Horn. They are officially termed out and did not reapply, but we also have long-term members as well of for Hillary and Blackerby and Committee Member Kathleen Rodriguez, who have reapplied, and we'll go through that process. But what I have here today to present to each of you is just certificates of appreciation. I know that several of you have had multiple terms on this committee, and I really feel in my public works professional life have grown with you as, through all these very important topics that we have on our agenda through the years, from the East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan that took a lot of agenda items, of course, with all the capital programs, and we have one tonight, and then also our bicycle master plan and all those meetings, and we've had where in certain neighborhood meetings where this room is completely full, and what an amazing job you have all done, and have just really appreciated your expertise with Committee Member Horn and Rodriguez with the strong background in public health, and Eve with the micromobility, and Committee Member Blackerby with all the transit and sort of everything transportation. What a gift you bring to this committee, and really appreciate just the hours that go with this committee, and for, thank you for spending our evenings with us, and being there as liaisons for the public, and being liaisons on behalf of this committee to Planning Commission and City Council. So what I have here is just certificates. I'll pass these down, but just want to say how much we've appreciated you.
It's very nice.
And then the second announcement is an announcement that we're so beyond happy about. We did receive the staff recommendations for the active transportation program for Cycle 6. And we have great news to report. It's that all 3 of the projects were recommended for funding. So that is the I think I'll say it by their titles: the Cliff Drive Urban Highway to Complete Street Transformation Project that would have the bike lanes and multi-use path along the whole entire stretch, a separated facility. The West Side and Lower West Neighborhood Active Transportation Plan implementation. And that one is just sort of everything in the kitchen sink, tons of safe routes to school improvements along all different parts throughout the neighborhood. And then also Milpas Street crosswalk safety and sidewalk widening project. Again, for major intersection enhancements there. That will tie nicely to the future pavement maintenance project. And so that the staff recommendation is for the request of $54 million. So beyond exciting, it's not official until the California Transportation Commission makes their vote on December 7th, and so we will not officially be out with media releases just yet, and for that, but we can't hold in the news any longer. It's just wanted to let you all know about that, and thank you for all of the various hearings and many more hearings to come with those projects now that we get to officially work on them shortly. So with that, I'll have Committee Member Blackerby provide her announcement.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to everybody who worked on that, because it's a huge deal, and that's just an absolute ton of money, and it's going to do such wonderful things, so I'm over the moon. Her last name is Grant. I'm just saying. Like, it's not her middle name. It's her last name. That's how good she is at it. Wanted to make an announcement. This is just hot off the presses, and it's going to really launch next week. But the State Street Master Plan, which you mentioned in the minutes, is coming to the public. The public outreach and engagement phase is starting next week. And I have flyers here that I can share with folks. But for folks watching at home, there's a dedicated website now, which is statestreet.santabarbaraca.gov. You will probably not be able to escape it over the next month and a half or so. So get ready to engage. There's going to be a survey that'll come out next week, really like a vision survey, so asking people what they think. This is not just for people who live in the city of Santa Barbara or work here. It's for everybody who uses State Street, doesn't use State Street, thought about it once, visited, something, anything, we want to get a really wide swath, because if it's just people who are already down there, it's kind of not that interesting. So we want everybody to participate. There's going to be 2 bilingual workshops at 1230 State Street next week. November 3rd, things will be happening from noon to 8. So hopefully you can find some time in there. But there'll be kind of an open house, staff available, people will be around at that location. And then that's the former Beans Barbecue location next to where Brazil Arts Cafe used to be. And then on November 4th, which I think is a Friday, from 7 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. So we're really gonna get most waking hours. Same location, that'll be open house, staff will be available and all that. So folks stopping by to check in, to see what's going on, what the process is like, and to give feedback. And the whole thing is called Create State, so there's like branding around it and stuff, so you'll start to see that. But yeah, that's exciting.
Great. And Committee Member Blackerby, with all of those dates, there is a website, right? To the if you could just say that for
Yeah,
those
I'll say it again. So it's statestreet.santabarbaraca.gov.
All right.
All right, thank you for those announcements. Those are big ones.
Yes.
Yes. Which I guess is kind of the theme of the night. There's some big presentations ahead of us.
Yes. So yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, well, let's go right into the reports, and I'm going to call up Chelsea Swanson, who's our project planner, that's going to be providing a report on the Castillo Undercrossings bicycle and pedestrian and facility improvements planning effort, as well as Mr. Bailey, our traffic engineer. It's a co-presentation, and the recommendation tonight, or we'll be probably going over that, so I am going to step aside and let Ms. Swanson have the mic.
Thank you, that's so sweet. I never got one of these before. What happened to her? She's just not here this time. Oh, okay.
Good evening, Transportation Circulation Committee. I'm Chelsea Swanson, Project Planner with Public Works, and joining me tonight, as Jessica mentioned, is Derek Bailey, Principal Traffic Engineer. And tonight we're going to be going over the Castillo Street Undercrossing Bicycle and Pedestrian Facility Improvements Planning Process. So the staff recommendation tonight is that the Transportation and Circulation Committee receive a presentation from staff on the Castillo Undercrossing Bicycle and Pedestrian Facility Improvements Planning effort, and to please provide feedback on the project design concepts. So to just go over the purpose and project overview, as we all know, Castillo Street Undercrossing is a very important connection in the city for walking and biking between the downtown area and the waterfront, and also an important connection to Santa Barbara City College. So really this effort is to look at ways to improve walking and biking in this important connection. We've heard from the community, from the pedestrian master plan outreach process in 2006, the bicycle master plan update in 2016, and we continue to hear from the community that there's a strong need to improve safety in this location for walking and biking. So we did receive a Measure A grant to do this planning effort, which really covers preliminary survey concept designs that we developed in-house, and also this public outreach process. To date, we have gone out to the community and had 2 webinars and 1 in-person meeting, which brings us to tonight to receive the feedback from the TCC. And the ultimate goal of this whole planning process is really to develop a community-supported project so that we're ready to apply for grant funding in 2023 or 2024 for final design and construction. So again, just to highlight the need for this planning effort and future project, these photos are taken on Castillo Street, and it's in an area, so the cyclists are going south toward the waterfront, and this is one of the locations we'll be getting into depth in a minute, where we'd like to improve the connectivity. For example, the bike lane ends abruptly, and cyclists are forced to share the lane with traffic that mostly would be wanting to turn right. So we're looking at improving this section on Castillo Street. And this graphic really just highlights the existing bicycle facilities in the vicinity in the dark solid arrows, and then the future planned in the dashed arrows. And you can see the gaps in the connectivity on both Haley Street and Castillo Street, where we will be focusing this planning effort. This graphic just really further highlights the gaps in the network, and the red arrows are the locations where we'll be looking at proposed new facilities. Again, that we'll get in more detail in just a minute. The other focus of this planning effort and project is to improve the pedestrian experience in the facilities. The picture on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left is Castillo Street looking towards Highway 101, where we have a 5-foot wide sidewalk, and pedestrians have to travel between a wall and often heavy volumes of traffic. So there's no buffer for pedestrians between the traffic and where they're walking. And then the photo on the right is an example of what we'd be aiming for with this project. It's on Carrillo Street, a recently constructed project where the wall was pulled back, and it's an overall 10-foot wide sidewalk corridor where there's a 6-foot wide sidewalk and approximately a 4-foot wide tree well. And again, that's what we're aiming for, to have a buffer between pedestrians and traffic. This is another example of a location we're looking at improving on the left. That's Haley Street, the 300 block, West Haley, where again you have a 5-foot narrow sidewalk next to traffic. And we do have opportunity to widen the sidewalk there. The landscaping where the palm trees are is actually public right-of-way. So the trade-off here, if we do widen the sidewalk, would be tree removal for 6 palm trees. And again, on the right, that shows an ideal sidewalk corridor layout, again with the 6-foot sidewalk and a tree well area to have a buffer. And this again just demonstrates, this is taken from the pedestrian master plan, and it's just showing for locations that have a 60-foot wide right-of-way or greater, where the ideal furnishing zone, which again you would put trees or parkway landscaping, would be 4 feet wide, and then the pedestrian through zone is the sidewalk. And then the frontage zone that you see there, the 1 foot 6-inch frontage zone, that's really a guideline for private development when it's provided on the private property typically, and provides a buffer between buildings and back of sidewalk. So this graphic here highlights again the areas where we have opportunity to improve the sidewalk and widen it in all of the yellow highlighted locations. And again, as we just went through, there are conflicts with widening in certain locations. Again, on Haley Street, there's like the tree conflict, so there would need to be some tree removal. And then on Castillo Street, south of the highway, there would need to be some property acquisition from 2 different properties in order to widen the sidewalk to the ideal corridor width. I'm going to now hand the presentation over to Derek to get into some more details of the project.
Thanks, Chelsea. So when we began looking at this project, one of the constraints with the project that we had to acknowledge right off the bat is the bridge structures. Castillo Street goes under the Union Pacific Railroad Bridge. That's the bridge in the foreground of the photo, and Highway 101, which is the bridge in the background of the photo. This project is not going to fix those bridges. The width that's underneath those bridges is about 62 feet, and that's what we're fixed with, so we have to work within that 62 feet. Getting into widening that would be getting into bridge replacements, and that would trigger addressing a whole bunch of substandard things that are associated with this interchange. And order of magnitude, this is probably probably closer to $100 million interchange replacement project. So that is quite a ways down the road. So the question is, what can we do in the meantime, smaller, more reasonably, in order to improve safety and improve the comfort for roadway users? The other thing this is not is also addressing the leaky slab. And I think everybody knows that there are water issues at the Castillo Street underpass. This is a Caltrans owned facility, and so from the city's perspective, it's not a feature that we want to take on and get exposed to the risk of maintaining that in the future. That could gobble up a good portion of our capital improvement program, which we have many other needs in the city. So go to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to just kind of walk you through some of the features and possibilities that we see for these corridors. Could I borrow the mouse just so I can point at things? Thank you. And there's a lot going on this screen, and I'll probably be moving relatively quickly. So these images are available on our website. And so if anybody wants to take more time to review them, please visit on our website. Just to orient you, my mouse is hovering over Montecito Street, and so City College is kind of down off the bottom of the screen, and this is Castillo Street, so going towards the beach on the right and towards Highway 101 on the left. And so I'll start with this southbound side of the road. So that's coming from Highway 101 and kind of climbing up that hill towards Montecito Street. There's a really short bike lane as you climb up out of the interchange that ends rather abruptly. And so that is kind of a bad combination because cyclists are losing their momentum as they're going uphill, and they're also dealing with those heavy traffic volumes coming from the interchange. The cyclists, as they climb out of the interchange and up the hill, they're into this what we call trap right turn lane, so that it's a mandatory turn lane where the bike lane continues south of the intersection towards the beach. So one possibility is where that bike lane ends, we could transition to a raised bike lane, and there would be it would be up at sidewalk level, and there could be a 2-foot buffer between the raised bike lane and moving traffic, and that raised bike lane would continue all the way to the intersection where there would be a dedicated bike traffic signal phase, and when they have that dedicated bike traffic signal phase, they could cross Montecito Street and continue on to the beach. This is an especially important connection now that we got the good news about the active transportation program, because that's also the eastern end of the Cliff Drive project. So where my mouse is hovering over right here, That's the multi-use path that's going to go up the hill towards City College. So this is a really important connection as people come down from City College and they want to go either go to the beach or towards downtown. So in order to make room for a raised bike lane, we have to push the sidewalk out towards the property somewhat. And my cursor keeps disappearing, I apologize. One possibility that we could do is to create the 10-foot wide sidewalk area that Chelsea described with street trees. That would result in property acquisition right here at this property. We don't think we could reasonably acquire property from the property on the corner, just because they do have such a narrow, tight parking lot, and it would make the site, it couldn't function. Another possibility is to not put in trees and go with a narrower sidewalk section. That would really minimize the amount of property we would need in order to fit these features in. Going the other direction towards downtown, there is not room for bike lanes on both sides of Castillo Street. There unfortunately just isn't. So as we're going towards downtown, it's in the downhill direction, so cyclists would have to take the lane. But in terms of which side, if we could choose one, would be more important to have a bike lane. We think climbing uphill out of the interchange, and especially dealing with those really heavy right turning volumes going towards City College, it would be better to have the dedicated bike lane going southbound. Also going northbound, there is opportunities to widen the sidewalks. The corner vacant property, if and when it develops, they will be required to implement the pedestrian master plan, which is that 10 feet plus tree wells. The second property from the corner, that's the Genealogical Society. Currently their sidewalk is 8 feet wide, and so in order to have a consistent sidewalk width, we would need to acquire 2 feet. So that would be a consideration as well. And then going towards the freeway, again, we would like to maintain that 10-foot wide section. You move us forward. Okay, so moving towards the freeway, again, you can see where we just were at Montecito Street. Those existing retaining walls that create that 5-foot wide sidewalk, those could be folded back as we get closer to the freeway and just provide that widened sidewalk area. One thing about the street trees is there is a high groundwater table there, so we're unsure of the type of species that would be well suited to more of a wet environment. Pardon me? Both sides are about even. Yep. And then where you see the sidewalk narrowing here, that's getting close to the UPRR bridge, and that's where we're fixed at that 62-foot wide width. Next slide. So then crossing over to the north side, you can see we go under the freeway, and again, there are narrow bike lanes under the freeway, and we did get some feedback from the public, which Chelsea will talk about later. But if we're going from the beach, going towards downtown, once cyclists are climbing out of there, they'll actually have 2 options. One option will be just maintain an on-street bike lane, and that would require just reducing the size of that triangular shaped island, and that on-street bike lane could continue up Castillo Street, where there's already an existing bike lane across from the DMV. That'd be a really good connection to get over to Bath Street and up towards Cottage Hospital. The other option for cyclists is, again, they could get on a raised bike lane here, and that would get them around the corner onto Haley Street, which would feed into a bike lane and eventually over to the existing bike lane on Haley Street, which goes all the way towards the east side. That existing right turn lane right now that vehicles use, it's quite wide. It has quite a large turning radius, so it really promotes speed, and it's not a good space for cyclists and vehicles to be sharing right now. So the right turn lane, it's actually rather hard to see, but we would reconfigure the curb line to make it more of a turn for vehicles, and that would just slow them down. And again, we could, in this area, because there's some empty property on the corner, we could provide some separation between the raised bike lane and widen the sidewalk and add street trees without any property acquisition. So doesn't seem to be any trade-offs there. I'm just going to jump across to the north side of Haley Street. Again, that's the photo that Chelsea showed with the palm trees. So one option would be to widen the sidewalk at the expense of the palm trees, but we could replace it with street trees there, and that would provide a buffer between sidewalk and traffic. Going southbound from the DMV, there's a short section that the sidewalk was built at 5 feet against the curb, so that could be widened and straightened out and street trees added. And again, there's another potential sidewalk widening just south of the on-ramp. For cyclists and drivers, there would be some changes going southbound. So currently there's 2 southbound lanes. Drivers could go straight from either lane, and those 2 traffic lanes feed into these 2 traffic lanes that are on the south side of the intersection. But if there's a bike lane plus 2 traffic lanes feeding into that, what happens to cyclists as they cross the road at the same time as the 2 traffic lanes? One thing we could do is to turn one of those lanes into a dedicated left turn lane, so they'd be forced to turn onto Haley Street and there'd only be 1 lane going south on Castillo. The traffic volumes there, actually that works quite well. There's quite a bit of left turning traffic there. And the way we could stripe this is to guide that single traffic lane to the inside lane. And then the cyclists would take the lane, the traffic lane, for a short distance around this bend, and then they would feed into that existing narrow bike lane under the freeway overpass. So that would provide cyclists with some dedicated space, and they should be able to get around the corner there comfortably. So then if we continue east on Haley Street, so we're turning our orientation here. So this is Bath Street on the right side of the road, and going up Bath Street is north. Again, if we go back here and we look at this raised bike lane coming up out of the underpass, and then it turns the corner and then would drop back into the street into just a class 2 bike lane, and that would continue east. And we'll get into the next block between Bath and De La Vina in the next slide. But there is another traffic change that would be necessary here as far as the lanes, and we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail here. But right now there's 2 lanes that go westbound towards the freeway. In order to create room for a bike lane, we would have to go down to 1 lane. And then going eastbound, there would be a single lane as there is today, and a left turn lane to go up Bath Street as there is today. And again, the sidewalk along here can be widened. There's a lot of, it's not a straight sidewalk. You have to change your walking path to get around utilities and stuff there. So that could be cleaned up and just made into a much nicer walking experience. So then if we go one more slide. Okay, so this is the block between Bath and De La Vina. There's 2 options for this block. The first option we're showing here is an in-street bike lane. And so where we would get the space to create an in-street bike lane is actually we would recess the parking into the parkway. So we would kind of make some carve-outs into the parkway. We would alternate parking with street trees, and that would create enough room on the street for a bike lane. And that would feel similar to the rest of Haley Street, where there's a bike lane between parking and the traffic lane. Next slide. So this is just a cross section of what that looks like. So this is looking east towards the mountains and downtown. So westbound wouldn't change on the left side of the road, or on the left side of the screen. Eastbound would change. So there's the traffic lane, the bike lane, and then the parking would alternate with street trees. The other option is to do a raised bike lane, and that raised bike lane would be between parking and the sidewalk. So again, we would have to create these, what we're called parking pockets. So the parking is kind of recessed into the parkway area and would alternate with trees. But the The bike lane would actually climb up from street level up to sidewalk level between parking and the sidewalk, and then it would drop back down into the street at the far end of the block. And just cross-section wise, that's what it would look like. So again, the parking and trees would alternate, and there'd be a 3-foot buffer between the parking and the raised bike lane, just in case doors open. And we would have a 4.5-foot wide raised bike lane right next to a 5-foot sidewalk. Ideally, those would both be wider. 6 and 6 would be great, and it would be even better if there was some separation between the bike lane and the sidewalk. But just given the right-of-way constraints here, this is the optimal configuration. Okay, so kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier about changing the lane configuration on Haley Street in order to fit in a bike lane at Bath. So this is that area just immediately west of the Bath and Haley intersection. And right now, as I mentioned, there's 2 lanes that go towards the freeway. And if you go to the next slide. There's a couple ways that we can possibly deal with that. One of them is the restriping that we mentioned. The other option that we analyzed was possibly putting the bike lane where the parkway is right now, but we found utility conflicts, trees, traffic signals. It's not particularly wide, so it would likely be expensive and probably not particularly comfortable. So we focused our efforts looking at the restriping. So on the left, that red arrow shows the lane that would be removed, and that's just immediately west of the intersection. As you go towards the freeway, it would open back up to 2 lanes, and then the existing lane configuration as you get closer to the freeway even opens up again to 3 lanes. Next slide. So the removing a lane west of the freeway kind of has a cascading effect. If we remove a lane west of Bath Street, if we remove a lane west of Bath Street, east of Bath Street, there's 2 lanes feeding into that. So you can't have 2 lanes feeding into 1 lane, so we would have to eliminate this lane as well. You can only have 1 lane feeding into 1 lane. And by doing that, we lose some capacity at the intersection. And this is an important intersection because it serves the Bath Street off-ramp, and it's also an important way to get to the Castillo Street on-ramp. So capacity is something we would need to address. The way to do that is to turn Bath Street into a 1-way street south of Haley. So right now, south of Haley, Bath is a 2-way street. It doesn't turn into a 1-way street until north of Haley. That's where the bike lane begins. But south of Haley, it's a 2-way street right now. So by adding a lane going northbound, making that a dedicated left turn lane, that adds the capacity to the intersection that would offset that other lane that we would remove. And this actually has a secondary benefit because that existing single lane that comes from the Bath Street off-ramp up to Haley Street, that backs up to the freeway regularly. You know, it's especially driven by City College schedules, but at times that can back up towards the freeway. So adding this second lane would actually more than offset the capacity loss of that short lane up here near the bus stop. That lane is only about 3 vehicles long and doesn't add a lot of capacity, but it's enough that it would be noticed if it were to go away. Next slide. So we know that from a traffic perspective, it's actually a good thing for the intersection. It's not just a good thing for the bike lane, but it'll also relieve some of that off-ramp queuing that's happening. But the question is, so if you live south on Bath Street, how do you get home? How do you get to your business? The way to do that would be via De La Vina Street. So if you're eastbound on Haley, it would be going to De La Vina, turning down De La Vina. There's either the back alley or Cottage Grove, which would take one over to Bath Street. We did some traffic counts, and we found that typically during peak hours, traffic going from the off-ramp up Bath Street was in the 400 to 500 an hour range. Going from Haley Street down was typically in the 10 to 20 range. So pretty lopsided as far as what the demand is. And about half of those 10 to 20 were heading for somewhere around Cottage Grove, so they could reasonably use De La Vina. So we're probably looking at about 10 during the peak hour, which we would be creating a more circuitous route for. So I'm going to turn it back to Chelsea, and she can talk about what we heard.
Thanks, Derek. So I'm just going to highlight some of the bigger themes we heard from doing our public outreach. We got a lot of great feedback, both at the webinar and the in-person meeting. So there was support from the community that we heard to widen the 300 block of West Haley's sidewalk, and again, to remove the 6 palm trees. We did hear that that was a desired change. There was general support for widening the sidewalk on Castillo. The photo at the bottom of Derek is showing, he's holding a tape measure showing what it could be. And then also the desire for better lighting, more lighting on Castillo, pedestrian lighting. And we did meet with property owners early on both sides of Castillo Street to talk about the potential for property acquisition to widen the sidewalk. And there were concerns from both property owners about, impacts to their property. Here we're looking at the east side of Castillo in front of the Genealogical Society, and both in the photo and in the diagram on the bottom. So just to go over what Derek already went over in the bottom, that red line shows the 10-foot sidewalk on the corner that we know would be going in either as part of this project or as the private development, whatever comes first. And then here we either have the existing 8-foot sidewalk to retain, or that was another potential area where we could widen by 2 feet to make it a consistent sidewalk corridor. Once we get beyond this corner, there's a jog in the right-of-way line. So once you get to the driveway of the Genealogical Society, there is opportunity again to widen the sidewalk corridor within the right-of-way, and that would not require any property acquisition. One thing I wanted to point out as well, there was a desire to lengthen the left turn lane on Castillo that turns onto Montecito Street, so that it would help with people turning into the driveway at the Genealogical Society. And so that's something we're studying, and there is potential that if we were to do that, it might require that widening of the sidewalk area. And now we're on the other side of Castillo Street, on the Santa Barbara Historical Museum property frontage in the middle there. And again, this is JJ's Liquor on the corner. And as Derek mentioned earlier, in order to fit the raised bike lane in this section, there would have to be property acquisition at the Historical Museum property, but there is a range of opportunities there. The smallest side would be about 2 to 3 feet into their property for a continuous 5-foot wide sidewalk from basically the corner to where my cursor is here, where again there's another jog in the right-of-way. The other option, which would be more acquisition, would be where this white line is, and you could start that 10-foot wide corridor earlier at the Genealogical Society the Santa Barbara Historical Museum property. But again, we did hear concerns from meeting with them about they really want to preserve the widest buffer they can between their buildings on site, which are city landmarks, and the sidewalk, and just allow for future development potential on their property. And then another, people did, as mentioned, bring up a lot of concerns about the existing undercrossing and the Caltrans right-of-way, and how it's frequently wet in the bike lane. And one idea that came up from a community member was to raise the bike lane to the level of the sidewalk. I'll let Derek talk about the sections here that he created.
Thanks, Chelsea. So again, we have 62 feet with which to work under the freeway bridge. It is Caltrans right-of-way, so we are beholden to Caltrans design standards and lane widths. Caltrans standard lane width is 12 feet, and anything below 12 feet is a design exception and challenging to get. They currently have 11-foot lanes under there, and that's just because there just isn't enough room under there. They really have no choice. But one option is to essentially expand the sidewalk area from an existing 5-foot wide sidewalk to 8. And that 8 feet would be a shared bike pedestrian space. And that would leave a 12-foot curb lane and 11-foot interior lanes. Caltrans likes 12 feet against the curb, and it's people, when they drive, they tend to shy away from the curb, so it is a reasonable thing for them to be asking for. So this is something that we struggled with a little bit, to be honest with you. You know, what's better? The image on the top, the existing, where there's a 5-foot wide sidewalk and a narrow 4-foot wide bike lane that travels through some wet areas, or this combined 8-foot wide space as shown on the bottom. It would be up out of the wet areas, so that would be less of an issue. But 8 feet isn't a lot of space for cyclists and pedestrians to share. You know, is it busy enough that there's going to be frequent conflicts under there? I wouldn't say frequent, but you know, they'll definitely happen from time to time. So this is kind of where we are right now, is to you know, what's the optimum configuration for this interchange. And I think we're leaning towards what's on the bottom with the shared space, just given the frequent issues that we have with the surface being wet and some of the safety issues that are associated with that, with cyclists losing grip. And especially on the west side of the road, there is not a lot of pedestrian traffic. The majority of the pedestrian traffic is on the east side of the road. So that's, if there were conflicts, where there's more likely to be conflicts. So I think that's where we're leaning right now, but we are seeking feedback. This is the first time that we've shown this publicly since we had the public meetings, and we got some feedback from the public. So now's the time for people to start chiming in. And again, the two options on Haley Street between Bath and De La Vina, as far as what the community prefers, as far as the in-street bike lane, which would be consistent with the rest of the corridor, or the raised bike lanes that are a little bit narrower than we would prefer, but provide that protection from the street traffic. The bottom configuration with the raised bike lane is likely much more expensive. And, you know, we were wrestling, is it worth this one particular block given the entire corridor has in-street bike lanes with the extra expense? We heard mixed feedback from the public. Some people thought the extra protection is a really good idea, even if just for a block, and others didn't think it was worth the money. And again, those are just comparing the two cross sections with the in-street bike lane on top and the protected bike lane on the bottom.
Thanks, Eric. And I did want to add, which maybe you said, but I'll add, and we did hear support from the public for minimal parking removal to accommodate either option of those on the bike lane. So here's our desired feedback from the TCC. Again, just summarizing some of the bigger themes and feedback we received from the public. We'd like to hear from you about the sidewalk widening options where it would require property acquisition on both sides of the street. Also the raised bike or shared bike and pedestrian shared path, the idea of doing that in the Caltrans right away under both bridges. And then also support or non-support for widening the sidewalk on the 300 block of West Haley where the palm trees are, which would require their removal. And then the 2 Haley Street bike lane options on street versus raised and separated. And then lastly, the changes on the 400 block of Bath Street from a 2-way street to a 1-way. And I did want to point out, I think I didn't earlier, we did have a webinar specifically for the Bath Street neighborhood where we noticed the residents in the area. We wanted to hear their feedback first on the changes that would take place on Bath Street. And we haven't heard feedback from residents in that or business owners in that area one way or the other. So just wanted to note that as well. Then lastly, the next steps after this meeting, we will meet with Caltrans in the next few weeks to talk about that concept that was brought up at the meetings. We'll be working on taking all the feedback from tonight and from the public meetings and implementing it into the concept design. We do plan to reach out to the property owners again to meet with them to talk about the different options where property acquisition would be involved. And then we would finalize the design and construction cost estimates and provide a final report to SB CAG by the end of the year, which really wraps up the Measure A planning effort. And then in 2023, we would take the concept plan to design review, which would be the Historic Landmarks Commission in this case, and also City Council for approval to move forward with the project for further funding and for the support for the Bath Street circulation changes. And then the next grant funding opportunities would be in the fall of 2023 or the spring of 2024. And if applications are successful, we would anticipate construction around 2027, 2028. So that wraps up the presentation, and we welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Are we open to public comment first or committee comment? Questions, okay. One question I had was on the Castillo Street next to that liquor store right there going, I guess, was that east, south? Okay. I think right now there is almost like a driveway entry to that, so it'd just be a wider concrete bike lane there, but they retain the feature of that driveway entry. Because I know people basically hop into that and use that as a bike lane when that bike lane ends and then get into the sidewalk there. So.
Yes, in order to maintain property access, we would have to maintain the driveway. But instead of cyclists having to make that maneuver in order to avoid the right turning traffic, they would have their own dedicated space.
And then one other question I had would be from, going down to the bottom, where there would be the southbound on-ramp onto the highway. So if you'd have a wider bike lane there, that would basically just be a wider ramp emptying into that basically exchange between the right turning traffic and the bike lane there.
The, can you advance one more slide? And then just, if you can hover over the green skips there near the on-ramp. The lane configuration wouldn't change in that area right now. There is a short bike lane in that area, so as you're coming from Montecito Street down the hill towards the interchange on-ramps, the road does flare open a little bit, and so the way Caltrans has it striped right now, there is a short bike lane, so that wouldn't change just because we're locked into those widths. So the radius onto the on-ramp likely wouldn't change.
Sure. Committee Member Blackerby?
Thank you for this. One question about well, frankly, anywhere we do these projects, but on Haley, you're right about you kind of have to jog in and out of utility stuff. I'm just curious, from kind of a public works and city perspective, what is is there ever a time when you do a project, and I know it costs more money, but where utilities can be undergrounded? And I know there's like all kinds of flavors of utilities through there, but there are power lines. Is that ever part of something, or?
My understanding is that if there's no room for the utilities after, then that can trigger undergrounding. Alternately, you know, if it's the city's desire to underground, you know, the city can take on that expense. The thing about these projects is because the city has such a large maintenance backlog, and it tends to dedicate its own funding towards the maintenance backlog. We rely on grant funding for a lot of these types of projects, and incorporating utility undergrounding into what we're asking for makes our funding applications less competitive. So it's a trade-off. I don't know that our alignment here would trigger undergrounding just from a space requirement, so it would likely be something the city would have to pony up for.
Okay, thanks.
A question? I'm not clear, either I missed it or it's not part of this discussion. When you're coming down Castillo and you approach this area we're talking about, there's a quick right turn to get on the freeway going north. And is that beyond the scope of this discussion? Or did you touch on it and we kind of talked about other places?
We touched on it very briefly.
Okay.
Can you blow that up so it's easier to see? Just make it full screen. If I can borrow the mouse. So that's this area down here. So this is the DMV property, and then going south on Castillo Street, this is that little hook right turn lane to get onto the on-ramp. Changing the configuration of the on-ramp is not something in the scope of this project. So it's just as the bike lane and the traffic lanes pass by that on-ramp, that's what would change.
Well, the concern always is, are the bicyclists going to be able to have an opportunity to get out of the way if a car's zipping onto the freeway?
Yes, and with the class 2 lane, that's how the right turns work. You know, they're supposed to become a shared space as they approach the right turn lane, which ideally, as we're proposing to do as you get closer to the Montecito Street intersection, there can be that dedicated space and possibly even a dedicated traffic signal phase. But it does take up more space, and it is an expensive feature as well.
Are we on questions or comments or both? No comments? We can't do comments? Not yet, okay.
I have a few questions. Can I go next? Okay, thanks. Can we go to slide 12? I think. Page 12? Yeah, I think you kind of touched on this, but the right turn where the green lane going southbound towards the intersection approaches like JJ's Liquor there, that driveway is still going to be preserved, right? So people would be turning there. Is there a reason like you want to keep the bike lane like hugged to that corner instead of putting it in between the through lane and the right turning lane?
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. So that's what we call a weaving maneuver, where, you know,
Oh, yeah.
traffic and bikes basically have to change their position, and that right turning movement, again, it's another one of these movements that's really driven by City College traffic, can be 600 or 700 per hour, and in terms of traffic volume, that's like a through the roof type right turn lane volume. You know, normally we would expect to see 100 or 200 would be a busy right turn movement, but to have 600 or 700, that's extremely busy. So that type of weaving maneuver has safety issues, and that's why I think it's safer to take the bike lane right up to the intersection and have a dedicated phase for the cyclists to get across.
Nice, yeah, that makes sense. So would that look like just giving cyclists like a leading time, like a light to go first, or would they? Like, I guess because my follow-up question was going to be, are you planning on holding turns in the right turning lane while bicyclists are crossing, or like banning them on green, but obviously not with like that kind of capacity. So when someone's like coming up to that intersection and cars are turning right to go up onto Cliff, is it just, what's that interaction gonna look like?
There'll be dedicated phases, so
Oh.
the cyclists will have their own dedicated time to get across and complete the movement. And it's not just a lead, like you would see a leading pedestrian interval. It would be a dedicated phase to get across. And then it would revert to a green light for the turning movement, and then the bikes would have to stop. And so the trade-off with this is, you know, when you think about the traffic signal cycling through all the different movements at the intersection, and because it is such a big and busy intersection, the amount of time it can take to cycle back around to serve the cyclists again can be longer. So it is likely a movement that there's going to be more delay for cyclists, but it is the safest thing to do.
So a cyclist wouldn't be able to go with like the through traffic heading southbound when the traffic light's green going south on Castillo. There.
It's possible. We haven't worked out the exact sequence yet, but there would not be a conflict for through traffic and cyclists to go at the same time, as long as the right turners were being held up.
Okay.
It's just a matter of would drivers understand that? Because
Yeah.
the right turners might see the through vehicles next to them going and think that it's appropriate for them to go as well.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. This is sort of, okay, actually that's more of a comment. I have a question on slide, what's my next one? I guess slide 16. Well, I might be getting ahead of you guys here, but do you have an idea on the two concepts for Haley Street, like which one preserves the most parking?
It would likely be equal.
Okay.
Yep, because the thing that's really driving the parking supply on Haley Street is going to be that alternating parking trees configuration. The more trees we put in, the more parking we would likely have to remove. The wider the spacing of the trees, the likely more parking. So exactly what that balance is, we don't know yet, but that's going to be the trade-off.
My next question is on slide, well, maybe that's not, on slide 22. I think you already addressed this, actually. Let's see. Okay, I think those are all my questions. Thanks.
Excuse me, I had one more quick thing I forgot to ask. I don't remember the term. Is it a bollard, the posts that we use? And they're not like concrete, they're somewhat flexible?
Yeah, a bollard or a flex post type
Okay,
thing.
yeah, would those be involved going the underpass? Even, you know, if you do the raised with the combined pedestrian bike, is there even enough space to use them?
There's not, but if it's a really good question, because we've talked about that, and if you can scroll to where we have that cross-section towards the end of the presentation. And again, this kind of gets to the, I think that was it, right there, yep. Blow that up. So on the bottom, again, that's where the sidewalk would be widened from 5 feet to 8 feet, and within that 8 feet, it would become a shared space. Again, this is where we really struggled with, is 8 feet wide enough to be sharing that kind of space, and is it worth the trade-off of getting cyclists up out of the water and up out of a narrow 4-foot bike lane between traffic and a vertical curb? Any kind of flex post would likely have to be set at least a foot, possibly 2, off of the curb, and so you're squeezing that 8-foot sidewalk down to 7, 6 handlebars, cyclists, pedestrians, strollers. Yeah, it's gobbling up more very valuable real estate under there.
I have another question while we're on the slide. Specifically, like the picture on the left side, the spot where it's shaded and cars are turning right to go southbound on Highway 101. I feel, and I know that's Caltrans design, correct? I feel like I know that's sloped for like an ADA ramp purpose, but it feels like that where the person queues and waits to enter the crosswalk feels super vulnerable. Like I walk this all the time. I live 2 blocks from here. And so when you're standing there, you're at ground level with the cars that are turning, you know what I'm talking about, that are turning to get onto the highway. Is there a reason? Like I was gonna make this a comment, but is that a design decision for Caltrans? Because it feels like someone turning could just kind of almost drive, and you could see the scuff marks of cars kind of driving up into that section.
Yeah, I can't comment on how Caltrans designed those particular ramps. A contributing factor to pedestrian discomfort there is also the large turning radius, and Caltrans designs their corners so that large trucks can turn onto their facilities relatively easily. If we do get feedback that the desired path forward is the bottom facility, the 8 feet, and the next step then is going to be to approach Caltrans and start talking about altering the sidewalk on that leaky slab. But we would like to study the corner radii turning on and off of the southbound ramps at the same time, just to make sure they're not over-designed. We understand that Caltrans is going to be rigid with the ability for trucks to make their turns, but is it optimally designed? Is there some space to squeeze that down and create a more comfortable corner for pedestrians?
Thanks.
I have another question. When you were talking about, I'm not sure if it's 12 or not, but you were talking about having the possibility of a road with the part of the road going out for a tree, and then parking, and then another tree, which you mentioned later. And I can't picture it because I'm trying to figure out how far out would something for a tree go into the road. And I mean, are people gonna have to park? And I mean, in order to park, it's gonna be, if it goes out into the road for a couple feet, it's gonna be hard to get into the inside before you hit the next tree bump. And I'm just wondering if you could explain that a little bit.
Sure.
The dimensions of it, maybe?
Yes. Can you go to that image right at the very end where it shows the 2 bike lane configurations? That might show that parking pocket in a little bit more detail. Right. 29. Yep. So both of these configuration, or both of these images just show the in-street bike lane, and then on the bottom, the raised bike lane, but both have that common design feature where you would alternate the parking with the tree wells. A parking lane is typically about 7 to 8 feet wide. 8 is preferred, it's more comfortable, people are less likely to get their mirrors taken off. So 8 feet for parking. The tree well would probably go out about 6 feet. So if.
It would be like parking another car there or something.
It would, yeah, so
So-
it would, so if, you just look at the image up on the screen, you know, this first space right here would be 2 vehicles long. So if there's a car parked where my cursor is hovering and somebody wanted to park in an empty space right here, it would be parallel parking between the tree well and, we do have a local example of this, Wentworth, on the west side neighborhood, right next to Parque de los Niños. There are tree wells in the street, and people parallel park in between them. They made the tree wells a little too small, so the curbs are starting to lift up a little bit because of the trees, so we would avoid making that mistake again, but that's the concept.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I can picture it now.
Okay.
Thanks.
One additional question on the parking pockets. Just, is there an estimate for the impact on parking with the pockets?
Again, it depends on how dense we want the trees to be as a community, but it's likely 4, maybe 5 spaces, and there's about 20 on the block currently.
Got it, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so then we go to public comment.
We have one person for an in-person public comment. If you would like to make a public comment through Zoom, please raise your hand. First up is Barry Remis.
Good evening again. Thank you. Speaking as an individual, I think I want to try to briefly touch on 3 points. So, and with this slide that we're talking about right now, with the stretch on Haley between Bath and De La Vina, I believe, any chance or any opportunity that we could take to minimize the potential conflict between bicyclists and cars going in and out of parking spaces, I think is a good option to take. So, you know, I would be in favor of the raised bike lane the option that actually separates the bicyclist from the parking cars. Although, you know, they are adjacent to the sidewalk, so that's the thing. And so speaking of adjacent, well, actually, let me switch over to the Castillo and Montecito Street intersection that Committee Member Sanford was asking about earlier. So it sounds to me like that what we'd be looking at there might be akin to the new arrangement at De La Vina and Carrillo Street, where the right turn vehicles are now in a no turn on red arrow situation, perhaps, maybe. So that sounds like maybe a way to control the right turn motor vehicles movement such that the bicyclists or the cyclists that are now on the raised sidewalk can make the straight through maneuver. And then when we're getting under the undercrossings, under the underpass, for the shared experience of the bicyclists and pedestrians on an 8-foot widened sidewalk. It is attractive to be able to pull the bicyclists off of the moisture effect that occurs still. It's been lessened, I think, in recent years, but there's still reports from cyclists about going down and you know, on wet pavement. The first thing that comes to my mind is events like the 4th of July, or if we're going to continue to see parades along Cabrillo Boulevard, there is an awful lot of pedestrian activity, for example, on the mountainside coming back, as well as bicyclist activity, you know, after fireworks are done, or even getting to them. So I just wonder about what would happen in a situation like that and any potential conflicts. But if there is still the ability to be able to provide maybe marked sharrows or something like that, so that cyclists would know that they did have an option of being able to still ride in the street when there's heavy pedestrian traffic activity. That could also be considered as well. So just some thoughts to consider as you deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
There are no further public comments at this time.
Okay. All right, so now committee comments.
I have,
What'd you say?
Yeah, if anybody has comments to kick off,
I could go first.
go ahead.
Okay. I'm a little rusty here. So, yeah, I guess going to slide 12, I'm just going to kind of attach them to, there's a lot of features, so I'm just going to put them with like the images. Just a general comment on this, I don't think it's in the scope of this project, but like any level of beautification that could be done to the area where the vacant lot is and the bus stop is there would be really wonderful. That's a route that bus stop serves like SBCC and UCSB and is especially a little dingy and like lacks shade and general beautification. And I know that lot, I think I heard at one point it might be a gas station, a hotel now. Okay, well then I guess this is gonna happen. But yeah, so that was just my first comment. It's just that I support the tree plantings proposed here and just making that a more pedestrian, hospitable site, and I think some trees and shade would do that. My next comments were on slide 14, the intersection of Castillo and Haley. First, I just want to start by saying that I love the idea of supporting the bike lane continuing up Castillo towards, north on Castillo towards the DMV. I think that would be a wonderful connection. I also love the idea of addressing that right turning lane where cars are currently turning, I guess, eastbound onto Haley Street and adjusting the radius there because that is something that's like just so much needed. And then my last comment on this one is that looking at the bike lane going southbound on Castillo, I really like the addition of the green marking that's down by the kind of pork chop island where Kathleen, I think you were commenting on it can be a little awkward when people are getting onto Highway 101 North and bicyclists are there. I ride that and I use that little pork chop to like rest all the time. And I think the green will do a lot to improve visibility and just make the person who's biking there feel safer and more visible. Let's see. I guess my next comment is on slide 28. Looking at the two options for going under the Castillo underpass, I would say that I support the idea of doing the second option that's shown on the bottom of raising the bike lane section to be a raised bike lane that is joined with the sidewalk. Regarding people bicycling and walking, sharing that space, my observation is that's already happening more or less, even without this being the configuration, is that people who don't feel safe riding in the Castillo bike lane are usually getting on the sidewalk. And so I think that this is sort of design following function in a good way. So I support that. I also think that I ride in the bike lane there all the time, and I often actually end up merging into the travel lane there that's shown, the 12-foot travel lane, because it tends to be dry. And so I would rather take my chances as a cyclist riding with the cars and merging into that lane than staying in a very slippery bike lane. And I think what you'll continue to see here if we implemented the option on the bottom is that more confident cyclists might stay in the 12-foot travel lane and take the lane, especially when it's busy enough that you can ride at the same pace as the cars, which it often is, and that less confident cyclists will keep using the sidewalk, which will now include like an extended bike lane. And I think it kind of supports the two different types of movements that are already happening in that space. So that's my comment on the Castillo configuration. And then on the next slide, just I have like 2 more comments. So I also support, kind of echoing what Barry said from Move SB, the design on the bottom with the raised bike lane that conjoins the sidewalk. I think it does a lot to get people out of a conflict zone and get them separated. And again, like I said on the last slide, I think we know that this is a pretty, this gets pretty trafficky with cars. And so more confident cyclists will probably continue to take the lane. I would even go as far as to suggest like studying the use of maybe sharrows, but then that could get really confusing. I don't want people to, sometimes people follow sharrows in the street thinking like they have to be there. But again, I think more confident cyclists will take the lane if they're in a hurry and the traffic is moving slowly and they can keep up with it, while the sort of more less confident cyclists or just more safety, more risk-averse folks will appreciate having option 2, which separates them from traffic and from the door zone. And so I think that that's a great option there. And yeah, I think those are all my comments. Thank you. I think this is an awesome project, by the way.
Okay, I don't have nearly as much to say because I'm not a bike rider, so, on the streets, so thank you so much for all the feedback on those things. Just looking at the slide 31 where you're asking for feedback, I would say, for myself, it looks, what I could understand, it looks like the sidewalk widening in the first bullet on both sides of the street, that would be great if it could be done. I like that idea. For the results, look good. And then for the Castillo, the idea of the raised bike ped, shared path, as a bike rider, you thought that was a good idea, right? And Hillary, you take that road a lot too. Did you like that idea of the raised one? Well, you can.
I'll
you'll get
speak
there.
to it later,
You'll
yeah.
get there. Anyway, that looked to me just idealistically, without having ridden it, it looks safer. But I leave that to the bike riders. Whenever you're out of the wet path, it's better. Wider sidewalk, of course, looks great on the 300 block of West Haley. Looks better, looks safer. The Haley Street bike options, I can't comment on that. The Bath Street one-way section, that section seemed like a great idea to me. That's all my comments.
Thanks for this. As was alluded to, this is my neighborhood. After 13 years being on this committee and seeing all these incredible safety improvements throughout the city, they've finally come to my neighborhood. So I'm absolutely stoked. I know you're making lemonade out of lemons because it's near a really terrible Caltrans facility. One thing about that actually gives me hope is that I think last year Caltrans District 5, which is the one we're in, completed an active transportation plan for the district, and I know this facility is a pain point that's on their map and in the plan of not what to do, but we got to do something. So hopefully your meeting is fruitful with them, and I'll say all the engineering that's been done under there over the years and on the state highway system, there really is a new focus that I've experienced anyway lately of Caltrans being very honest about needing to repair the harms that the state highway system has done, and being really honest about that and what it means for cyclists and pedestrians. And so I actually feel hopeful that there could be, that you guys could work together to make the whole thing work. To that end, the mixed facility makes me super nervous, the raised function. I just feel like there's got to be another way, a better way. I don't know what it is. I would say if it was laid out the way you had it with raised, I would like do like a different treatment or different color, pavement color or something to kind of try to differentiate, even though you don't have room for separation between peds and bikes. Because like it might be okay if it was like coming up, but going down, their speeds. I mean, I've definitely been almost mowed down by a bike on the sidewalk. I do not blame them for riding on the sidewalk because it's super scary and dicey, but it's also a scary and dicey sidewalk just walking by yourself, 5 feet, no lighting. It's no good. So I'm kind of mixed on that piece. I feel like there's got to be a better engineering solution, but I don't know what it is yet. But I'm hopeful that, you know, if Caltrans comes to the table with like bigger, better ideas for just that facility in general, safety-wise, maybe something can be agreed to that works for everyone. The dedicated phase, super cool, super necessary. The way that bike lane just ends on the way up the hill, my life has flashed before my eyes many times. I try to avoid these facilities on bike and on foot, frankly, but sometimes you just can't because you just got to go a certain place. But I truly, like, anytime I'm like careening down the hill from Castillo under, I'm like, well, maybe this is how it ends. So, and it's just really, I mean, it's like funny but not funny because I'm serious. And yeah, so really, like, we're kind of nibbling around the edges, but this is some good nibbles happening because there's a lot to be addressed. So I think all of this is really excellent. Lighting is a big thing, which you mentioned. Super dark, especially on the east side, on the east sidewalk, on the south side of the freeway interchange. There's no lighting, it's super dark, and you're blinded by traffic coming at you. So I know that's probably going to be a Caltrans item, but hopefully that can be added in. The removal of the palm trees, yes, they don't really add much. So that makes sense to get rid of those, to widen the sidewalk. The question about the sidewalk widening requiring property acquisition, I think is super important, and also as a neighbor of these facilities, like, kind of no one uses them or goes to them for the most part that I've seen. I've lived there for 7 years. The genealogy driveway is like mostly closed. The historic thing, it's like by appointment only to even go there. Like, of all the sites there are, I feel like there should be a little give and take there. And would probably make it safer for people to come to visit on foot. So hopefully we can get to some type of agreement there. The Bath Street one-way makes a bunch of sense, and I was just thinking of that as like, hey, Caltrans, like, look, we'd be helping you out, not have queuing back onto your off-ramp, so like you want to help us with these other parts. They always appreciate operational improvements. The raised on Haley, the raised and separated versus on street. Yes, separated is always better. It's just kind of a really funky little stretch. Could you go to the slide that shows that section? One back, like the aerial. So, speaking of trees, so you mentioned, Eric, there'd be trees added in those little carve-outs. You can see on the left side of the slide, there's an absolutely gigantic, I want to say eucalyptus, on that corner. That is like up in the sidewalk, up in the roadway. It's a massive tree. I'm assuming that would be removed.
I think we can maintain it.
Okay.
We looked at that tree fairly recently with our city arborist, and if you notice on the sidewalk side of that tree, there is some significant deterioration. So he said the tree is in decline. How long that decline will take naturally, we don't know. We didn't ask that question, but just as I think we could build around it if there was a community desire to preserve the tree.
Okay. I'd say I hope it declines in a safe way rapidly because it makes it rough. I think it's dangerous to walk through there, frankly, because of how the sidewalk is lifted. And frankly, biking through there is a little dicey through, and frankly, driving through there is a little dicey because the roots are it's just a really massive tree, and the base of it is, kind of in the way. So I'd say raised is better. If there were trade-offs, I don't think the top one's the end of the world, but I think it would be nice to have these tree wells. I know that's something we talked about on Milpas, but I think it didn't maybe end up getting put in that plan. But I think it's something it's nice to have around town. And as we have these, this would be adding trees, but there are a lot of places in the city where there's really big trees and maybe they're not in the right place, but we're not going to take them out unless they take themselves out. And so working around them instead of having a tiny sidewalk makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the undergrounding of utilities piece, I think there are a lot of places in the city where it's like, this makes a lot of sense. I think it might make sense through this. I know that costs more money. It would be interesting to see. It would just really clean it up and have kind of a more predictable path of travel. And I think that's all I had. Oh, one last thing. Committee member Sanford mentioned the vacant lot. I don't know how this quite works. I know it's going through historic landmarks and things for a hotel, but somebody owns that property. It is so disgusting. The amount of litter and just like, I've seen the wildest stuff in that dirt, let me just say. Right on the corner, and the way it jogs out is really unsafe. I've tripped there a bunch as well. What's the sort of, like, for vacant properties, or frankly, properties that are actually occupied, what kind of sort of purview does the city have to say, hey, you can't just have trash in the roadway? I'm just curious what would have to happen to make something like that happen.
Ms. Grant may have something to add, but my understanding is if there's an issue on the private property, it would most likely be handled through a complaint through the community development department of whatever the issue is. So like a zoning enforcement complaint or building and safety, if there's a safety hazard, that they would go out and take a look at it.
I'm curious too, where the right-of-way stops and starts on that corner, because it's definitely in the, I would assume also in public right-of-way there. It's just one big mess.
On the Castillo frontage, the property line is basically in line with the wall that borders the Genealogical Society fence, more or less.
Okay. Yeah, it definitely bleeds into the public right-of-way, I would say, the disaster that is that corner. So good to know. I'd be interested in getting that community development contact so I can make a complaint. That's it for me. Thank you. Great project. Can't wait.
I think I'll be brief. I would concur with most of the comments that I've heard already. I don't need to be redundant. I just drove on that street today delivering my granddaughter to her tutor down near the beach, so I'm really familiar with that area. And I have a relative who fractured their pelvis on that underpass, so yeah, it's a scary area. All right. That being said, the comments that I would make actually relate to the fact that I live on the Las Positas bike path. So the conversations we're having here about bikes and people and the interfacing of bikes and people, we're using that bike pedestrian path now. So I think my observations are probably the thing that can be the most useful to you. I don't ever see anybody in the bike lanes that are on Las Positas Road. It's a very busy road, and I just don't, I mean, I'm not on it daily, but I'm on it frequently, and I honestly have never seen a bicyclist in the bike lanes, and whether I'm either driving or walking. The bicyclists go where the people are, the walkers are, in the mixed-use area. It's much safer. The only problem I see, and this is going to be big on State Street or on this project, everywhere where we're improving our bicycle utilization, is the lack of communication. Bikes come by and they don't have bells, they don't holler. I feel I'm like beating the drum for really good education for bicyclists. It's when some bicycle group, when we're walking, goes by and says, on your left, it's real easy to just make sure you know. But when they whiz by and the electric bikes are so silent, you jump, it's scary. And all these places where you're talking about, I think the shared sidewalk is probably more reasonable safety-wise, because I'm picturing the same thing as on the Las Positas where I'm walking. But there are women with strollers. I've seen grandmothers with strollers on the Las Positas and a toddler, and they're kind of dawdling along. And I've said, you know, you need to watch out for the bikes because they come up pretty darn fast. And if you're not prepared for it, you could really have some trouble with a little one because it feels so, I don't know, pastoral. You know, it's a lot of trees and it's rather quiet there. Even though the traffic's buzzing by, it's not right in your face. So I think all those issues have to be considered somehow. But that I would definitely support the having raised and separated when you can. I don't think, if the neighbors are not upset about removing the 6 palm trees, I think then that's the best thing to do. You know, it should be their call first if at all possible. We always know that. So, I think, and doing Bath Street one way sounds like a terrific idea. So other than that, I think all the other comments that have been documented, I would support, and I think thank you for your very thorough, well-prepared presentation, which makes it always much easier for us to understand these complex issues. Thanks very much.
All right. Yeah, I largely agree with what everyone else has previously said. I think maybe with the sidewalk widening, I think that makes a lot of sense just by foot traffic, especially like they called out the bus stop on the right side. With the raised bike shared as it enters the Caltrans area, especially on that right turn lane, I think maybe suggestion would be maybe like bot dots that extend off that intersection. They either were like something where an 18-wheeler could still take that radius, but is a deterrent for normal traffic. On the Haley Street bike lane, I think, especially that transition where it is so wide, where you carry a lot of speed, I think through that area, people maintain a high rate of speed in order to make that light. And so to reduce the vehicle speed there might kind of change that dynamic and then kind of change the shift in the need for either the raised or the on-street. I'm kind of like the consistency with what the rest of Haley has, but then if the speed of traffic is reduced, then maybe that kind of covers that base. And then also, I mean, same to effect with Bath, and you mentioned traffic stacking up on the highway. I think a lot of the characteristics of that intersection is people basically trying to make that light. Just once they get to it, they just commit to it, and you kind of take a sigh of relief as you make it through that intersection. So everything that I saw basically helps ameliorate that in a pretty large degree. So I think those are all really good steps that very positive. So thank you.
I just did want to add one thing. I do see bicyclists quite a bit on MODOC, you know, where it's 40 miles an hour. It's just the Las Positas section that I don't see it utilized. So it's very, very nice when you have some bikes on MODOC and then you have a combo of slow bikers and walkers and strollers and whatnot on the combination path. It's really wonderful and we love it. So.
I have sort of a question, is just out of curiosity, what kinds of trees are you talking about planting on these trees with the tree wells?
Really good question. So each street in Santa Barbara has designated street trees, and I honestly don't know what the designated street trees are for these particular blocks, if they even have one. Like for example, that block on Castillo Street between Montecito and the freeway, I don't even know if it has one. So it's probably a really good opportunity to talk about that once we start moving forward with the project of what these corridors look like as far as what tree species are used.
And I'm sure the arborist will have some ideas.
Yes, and I think that goes through the Street Tree Committee and ultimately the Parks and Rec Commission.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And 5-minute break? I can power through unless we want to. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and rejoin at 7:20.
Sweet,
Okay.
thank you.
report for the draft of the 5-year Public Works Street and Transportation Capital Improvement Program, fiscal years 2024 to 2025. So,
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Lavos, and good evening again, committee members. I always get really excited to revisit the Capitol. It's every 2 years. As one of the committee members, Committee Member Horn's like, I already know when it's the streets Capitol night because of the thickness of the staff report printouts, because we have so many projects in the Capitol program. Rest assured, we will not be going over each of the projects tonight, but briefly giving a general overview of the program. And so in addition to the overview, we'll also be open to the comments that are presented tonight on our program. And we're also specifically looking at the fiscal years 24 to 25. The reason that's important is the first 2 years of the 5-year capital program, that is supposed to resemble as close as possible to the upcoming budget cycle. So capital improvement, the program's revisited every 2 years for a 5-year program. And in theory, for our city budget is also in 2-year increments. But depending upon how the economy is doing, it always feels like we're revisiting the budget yearly. So just a little background on just in general for the capital improvement program. At the city of Santa Barbara, we are required by our charter to have a capital improvement program. So not only is the Public Works Department and our specific section focuses just on our streets transportation network, but other departments too have to put together their capital programs. So think Parks and Recreation Department, facilities, the airport, etc. And so really, what is the capital improvement program? It's a planning document. And it just forecasts what the workload will be. And I think that's what's exciting, or why I get excited, because that's gonna dictate what we're working on for really specifically for those next 2 years, and then what's sort of coming beyond those 2 years in terms of what exciting stuff we get to partake on. And a lot of that, of course, is funding dependent. And it also is a document too, when the city is looking at their budget, is, well, we know the cost, the yearly cost, but what is coming down in terms of our whole citywide asset management? And what is sort of the unmet capital needs, so we can budget in the future for that. And it is also obviously a very important document to secure grant funding. So the exciting announcement that I had earlier for the active transportation program projects, well, we wouldn't have been able to go past the first page of the grant application if it wasn't documented in our capital improvement plan and regional, and subsequently the regional transportation plan. So a lot of what our streets capital project, not only does it serve an important document with the city, but there is a relationship with the overall SB-CAG's regional transportation plan as well. So we need to make sure all the great stuff we're working on is dual documented. This is just in general, again, citywide, when we're looking at project prioritization. What are the needs? Where are those needs coming from? Is it documented in a plan? Is it a council action? And then what does the funding look like? And amongst the different programs, there's always a lot of restrictions on where the various funds can go to. And I'll go into what feeds our streets transportation program. So before I go into the funding sources, how do we get to all of these projects that are referenced in your exhibit B, A and B for the list of names. And really there's a lot of sources on where they could come from. It's our general plan, and under the umbrella of the general plan is our circulation element. The bicycle and pedestrian master plans have very long lists of capital needs documented in those. Our Vision Zero strategy also documents the key corridors where we have collision patterns and where we would need to have capital improvements on the corridors that do have engineering solutions. Neighborhood requests and the neighborhood transportation plans, just as you've seen over the years with the east side and most recently the west side and lower west neighborhoods. And also with our bridge, we have a lot of funding for bridge projects, and a lot of those are documented from the Caltrans bridge inspections. This is way too small, but this is our little cheat sheet that we go by just specifically for the streets transportation capital program, of sort of our internal way on how we weight the various projects. It's not meant by letter of the law that given X amount of points a project has that it's in the top priority. It's just a general tool that we use. But generally, if you're, no matter what program you're in the city's program, it's really maintaining what we have, and safety are our top priorities. That's common themes amongst all departments and the stuff that we work on. But for us, in addition to the safety and maintenance, again, or the cost of deferral, that plays really big into like our pavement maintenance program and why you don't want to keep delaying pavement maintenance, because the more you delay, then the more expensive the projects become over time. And then other things that we rank within our own program is project delivery. Is this something that could be done in and out within a year, or quickly part of our pavement maintenance program? As you know, we've had some projects with the pavement maintenance that we were able to add additional bike lanes and that type of thing. Leverage is when we get grant opportunities, and so some projects may rise above others because the funding came into place for a particular project. And then of course, city policy. Most of all the items that we work on usually come from very robust community outreach processes. So where does the money come from in our streets transportation capital projects? And there's the overall just our streets transportation capital program, and there's three main sources for that. It's utility users tax and gas tax, and the utility users tax that becomes from a formula from our finance department, and about half of those funds that we receive in those utility users taxes goes into roadway repair. Measure A is the half a cent sales tax. Again, this one is a formula base, and we will be receiving the upcoming projections starting next month for Measure A. And then there's SB1 funding too, which is also formula based as well. So in general, for our streets capital program, over the years of the cycles that I've worked on, approximately from all those sources, it's 2.5 to about 4.5 million, plus or minus, and which is great, but not a lot of funding. And so we had this amazing Measure C, come into play. I think it's 2018 was when it initially started, and that is also tax base, and that's where that was sort of the big game changer for our maintaining our road, because we, if you remember from, or those of you that are on the committee cycles ago, that pretty much 95% of every streets capital budget always went for pavement maintenance, likely so. But even with that, it was severely underfunded for many, many years. And so Measure E, or C, we have been able to use a lot of those monies to the tune of around 16 to about 19 million per year. And we'll go into that a little bit further, but that has been an amazing funding source. But we still have, even there was so much deferred work that we continue to need those funds from Measure C. And the most important, if we want to do any project, especially even if it's a safety project and larger dollars, we really have to go and get grant applications. And grants are so important. Over the years, I just have a quick synopsis of the active transportation program. Up until the first 5 cycles, we've been able to have 40 million towards really key community capital, active capital infrastructure projects. With the Highway Bridge Program since 2011, we've received 111 million towards bridges. And again, those are very high dollar projects, so very thankful for those programs, and been able to replace our critical bridge and infrastructure. And then our Highway Safety Improvement Program, another one, we've received about 22 million to date on that, and that really funds a lot of our key intersection improvements, a lot of safe routes to school projects, and yeah, again, where we've seen collision patterns, so that has been a tremendous source for our projects. And then Measure A grants, of course, we have the half-a-cent sales tax for just the sort of the community pool, but then there's the Safe Routes to School program under our local Measure A grants program, and bike and pedestrians. And so, yeah, we've had about 2.5 million. Those are some of our smaller projects, but small but mighty, again, of assisting with our active transportation network. So on your Exhibit A and Exhibit B is the list that's making it into the next 5-year capital improvements. I will not go over every single of the 67 projects. I will say that this is the first year that we've been under 80 projects, so yay, that's a good good thing, because there's sometimes years where is anything going to fall off the list because we're waiting for funding. And so we've been really happy to see a decrease in the number of projects, because there's so many projects just recently constructed or headed to construction this fiscal year. So we've had a decrease in that. And then we were able to merge some projects that seemed to make sense as well. So generally speaking, when you go through the document, and you'll see in the various project titles, because we have so many projects in our program, it's the most of any department as far as the number of projects. So in order for us to keep track of them, we had to come up with sort of what are the best grouping themes to them. And that's and on the screen is basically bike facilities, bridges, corridor improvements. And we try to label the corridor improvements when it's really a multimodal project with ped, bike, and vehicle improvements. We have drainage improvements, intersection improvements, maintenance, and that's a lot of our sidewalk maintenance, our roadway maintenance, pedestrian enhancements, streetlights, and traffic signals. And I think, oh gosh, okay, so on your Exhibit B is the sort of the template that we have, and this is a template followed with all departments as far as the format. And so those that are not familiar with our Streets Capital program, this is how all of our project descriptions are laid out, and they're all meant to be a one page. Because you can imagine how thick this is, and then when you get the rest of the city projects, that there's a lot of projects that the city council ultimately has to review. So again, on the top right corner, we'll have where the department or program it's coming from, what your project title is, the description of the project's purpose, the various plans or policies of where the project is coming from, the funding sources, and unfortunately, the way they have it set up, because it's a sort of a one-size-fits-all for the template, and not the best for us, but usually we cannot describe each of the grant and source names, so in the description, we try to put it in there. But what you'll see a lot of times is grant, and then one line, and you might see another grant line, because a lot of our projects also are multi-funded. And then what are the specific drivers at the very bottom of the project page? And the type of infrastructure that it is. And I think those were all the main items that make up the project description summary. Although I'm not going through all 67 projects, we always like to point out, well, what's new, because for those of you that have been on this committee and reviewed the one program 2 years ago, you will see a lot of repeat information. But the changes in that would be a lot of the status updates. And of course, since 2 years ago, everything got more expensive. So you'll see a lot of updated costs in there as well. But as far as for the new projects in our capital program this year is the Santa Barbara Junior High Multi-Use Path, and that's one of the projects that we went over that received Measure A funding in this last cycle, so that is reflected in the program. Corridor improvements, we have Las Positas Active Transportation Improvement Study. That is an area basically from the freeway along Las Positas going to State Street. We've actually had some segments of projects along the corridor, and then we thought it would be best to merge them all together and really look at that corridor holistically. We did receive funding for under the Highway Safety Improvement Program, I think we will find out in December, for the intersection at Las Positas and Stanley, and to do maybe a crossing improvement there. So yes, as Mr. Bailey just mentioned, December we'll find out, but that would be, again, sort of the kickoff and component to the overall study. The Lower East Side safety enhancements is sort of a spinoff from the East Side Neighborhood Transportation Management Plan. We were able to essentially do all the high dollar projects to get those funded that came out of that study effort in 2013. But there's a few little pieces that were remaining. And when Ms. Swanson did the kickoff for the Lower East Side connection of the bridge over to Dwight Murphy that we're looking at, and that's a preview as we come into 2023. We'll have an update on that effort, but as part of the outreach too, we were looking more in the Lower East Side area, and there's little segments there kind of scattered throughout that would improve active transportation for the residents, and specifically along this going towards the local elementary schools in that area, and some improvements too for Salinas Street, specifically lighting and one speed control and some intersection improvements there. That whole area in that project description for those improvements too, the Caltrans, of course, is also putting together their grant application for the final pieces of the Highway 101 widening project, and they do need to have some local infrastructure adjacent to that. And so we had given them a project description from those multiple planning efforts, and it's approximately about an $8 million cost, and so that is going to be part of their grant application, is to include those. The next item is pedestrian enhancements. This is the pedestrian master plan update. The last one we've did is 2006. And although we're always actively working on that plan, and we use it daily for when we're doing our private project reviews and our capital reviews. But there's a capital section in there that we feel just needs to be updated, and we need to go out and revisit with the community again on what's been done since 2006, kind of just like the bicycle master plan, and then how to reprioritize the remaining items that haven't been done, and is there anything else that wasn't on the radar in the 2006 that needs to be on the community's radar. So hopefully there's a lot of grant opportunities out there. I don't see it happening necessarily in the next 2 years, and hopefully in the next 3 to 4 is something that we're revisiting. And then the last item is a maintenance item, and it's the streetlight pole painting. Of course, in our coastal environment, the paint is not holding up as well, and it is time. Some of them are looking more unsightly, and to have a nice beautification and cleanup effort for those. So not too many to add to the program this year, but a lot of, just because we have so many great existing projects that we want to deliver, but these added ones are, I think, a good asset to our program. Again, I'm not going to go through this all in detail, but this is, as of right now, sort of making the cut for the streets transportation capital. So of the items that I mentioned, the UT tax and Measure A, SB1 funds, this is the list of projects that are making the cut for funding from our streets capital program. And again, it's really hard because you always see the first cut of the streets capital program, but we don't have all the numbers yet. And so really at this stage, we just hope to be in a ballpark of the kind of the 2.5 to 4.5 million. We're a little bit over on the FY24 side, but a little bit under, I think, on the FY25 side. But again, once we get the updated projections, and as we kick off the budget next month, we hope to have that. So generally, City Council will review and approve for the capital program in March, and then closely followed a couple months later is the budget. And so that's in your Exhibit C, and a lot of those projects too, especially with the bridge projects and even the drainage project, a lot of those also come into play with matching funding. So those are good we're leveraging good monies there. Measure C, we're right in the ballpark between about 15 to 16 million there. And again, that is just really maintaining what we have. Again, the pavement maintenance, a lot of our sidewalk repairs and access ramps and some minor sidewalk infill all gets put into the Measure C program. So on your Exhibit C is the list as we know it at this time. And again, it will get refined as we move closer into our budget process. So here's the grants. Look at the amounts to be programmed. So again, when we talk about our streets capital, that's always between 2.5 to 4.5 million. But look what we're receiving in a programming year. It's for the FY24. You're right about $26 million. So we do a really good job at leveraging funds. And let's see, smaller on the FY25 side, but that will change. We'll have some additional ones. So when all of these exhibits went out to you and they're ready, that was right when we also received news about the ATP programs. So I have an additional slide of some additional funding. Again, we have 54 million that will be coming to us, but you don't start with the 54 million. It's broken up into cycles throughout the year. So we actually, although that's a lot of money, it's the smaller dollars, and then the bigger dollars come for the actual construction of the project. So we will be updating our project sheets to, instead of unfunded to funded for those projects. And the only other program that we're waiting to receive word on is the Highway Safety Improvement Plan, and for the Cycle 11 projects. And then we also, with our Highway Bridge program, I think we just received word on one of those. So just we'll be confirming over the next 2 months as we're alerted by the state if we have received monies or not. So this is, again, just all the good work for our Measure C. We continue on in the FY23 year, continuing with big part is pavement maintenance. I forgot my notes on some of the other projects. Give me 1 second. Okay, so also coming into funding for this year is the Lower State Street Connectivity Project, or the State Street Underpass. So we'll be having some matching funds for Measure C out of there. There is still some remnants for the Las Positas Modoc multi-use path that has to do with the mitigation. So we'll think all the trees that were planted, those carry on a 7-year review period for once they're there, and some vegetation. So there was some funding for Measure C for that. Then the Modoc multi-use path extension has some matching funding out of Measure C as well. So that was he won't see that project it had been in our capital program, but we are expecting full final design and construction this year for that one. And there was some other matching fundings on one of the other highway safety improvements for the intersections. So again, this has been a tremendous source, but the biggest component and the importance is really helping maintain what we have. I'm not going to go through all of that, but that's essentially, again, we're running right around 16 million as far as going into our streets program for Measure C. But Measure C also funds a lot of key important other city projects as well. So you think of a lot of our parks and recreation facilities get Measure C funding as well. So next steps after tonight, and when we receive feedback from you, we will finalize everything in the next 2 months. As I mentioned, we are hearing back from our grant applications, and we'll be finalizing everything. The entire capital program goes to the Planning Commission for review in January, and then followed a couple months later to City Council. And then, as I mentioned before, the budget goes for review May, June of 2023. So that concludes the presentation, and just excited to receive your feedback. And I know it's always a lot to go through, but with me tonight also is Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer, to answer if you have any questions, especially on the pavement maintenance part. We also have Eric Goodall in the audience as well. Eric, if you raise your hand, perfect. And he is our principal city civil engineer, thank you. I just blanked. And so he oversees our streets design team and streets construction team as well. So very up to date on all of our bridge projects and drainage and all of the above, and has been the lead on the State Street underpass project that we're hoping to go for construction award this December. All right. Ready to pass it back to you, Chair Malavos, if anybody has any questions.
Questions from the group? No questions from me immediately. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just have to say, this is fantastic, but one huge disappointment for me is I'm kind of realizing that one of the things that we really, really need in the city that keeps coming up, and I keep bringing up too, and it probably will never happen unless it gets in this document, and I don't see it anywhere, which is bicycle parking facilities. So it just always gets brushed aside. And I mean, there's, oh yeah, we need that. And then it never shows up in any projects that I have ever seen. And I'm just hoping that you can tell me what the prospects are for that.
Committee Member Horn, you'll be excited that we do have it. It's actually captured under our bicycle improvement section, and we're also there. Well, I guess it is a new project. I've admitted that, but it was in the bike facilities. It's a geospatial inventory of bike infrastructure. So we had just gone through a major update of our bike infrastructure, documenting our on-street facilities, off-street, etc.
Who did that?
And our department did that, and we have a new GIS staff person who is amazing. But we do see a need to document all of our bike parking that has never been documented. And so we're hopefully able to hire some interns through UCSB to do that documentation. And we're also seeing sort of like the streetlights that I mentioned for repainting of those, is that a lot of our hitching posts have fallen into disrepair, and they're not as well loved of a bike rack tool. It violates, we don't have the 2 points of contact that we require on all private developments. And so we are hoping to go to the design review boards soon with a potential new bike rack that is also more cost effective. So it is definitely on our radar. Sorry for the long answer, but the short answer is it's definitely on our radar.
I needed the long answer. Thank you. And you said it's somewhere in one of these documents?
It's documented in
page?
2 locations of the larger printouts on Exhibit B, and it's under the bicycle improvement page, and that's page 2 of 67, and then page 5 of 67 is the other documentation for the need for GIS.
Thanks, I'll look for it, thanks.
Okay.
Is there any other questions from the committee, or we go to comments? Okay. Is there any public comment or online public comment?
There's no public comment at this time.
Okay.
I just have a clarification question. We have, the airport and and this page, and this page, this seems to be the key document going with this. Now tie these in for me, please.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we have, thank you for that question. On Exhibit A, I'll get that corrected. It was pulling in some additional departments. It's, if you go under the heading in this handout for streets transportation, it starts the 67 projects. And the 67 projects are mentioned in detail in Exhibit B.
Right, so
Yeah.
what are Exhibit A and C and D
Okay, and
supposed
then,
to add
and
for
then
us?
Exhibit A is sort of the cheat sheet in a list format to Exhibit B, and Exhibit B is the details.
Okay,
And then Exhibit C is the FY 24-25, what is anticipated to be part of the budget at this point in time, knowing that we'll have a refinement over the next 2 months.
got it?
And Exhibit D is what we have for grant funding coming in for the next 2 years and what the anticipated city match is. And that's critical so we could deliver upon these grants that for the city matches, we need to make sure that those are part of our capital program.
Thank you.
I have like a few really quick questions. With Measure C, I know that you identify like pedestrian enhancement, sidewalk infill as like as a line item, and I think you also maybe have funding in other pools of funding for that. I feel like I had a conversation with Derek Bailey once about like street repaving or pavement maintenance, like moving around in districts, or you guys have zones that you cycle through. How do you address like pedestrian improvements? Do they also move in cycles, or do you respond to like sort of public comments or problem areas that you have identified?
Committee Member Sanford, good question. The amount of money that's available for pedestrian facility enhancements is relatively small. So doing an entire block of sidewalk, including design and everything like that, you know, that can be $500,000 type thing. So with the amount we have available, what we typically do is some of the smaller sidewalk infill projects, like if sidewalk is missing in front of 2 or 3 homes, we can fill in those gaps. There's quite a few of those still on the west side neighborhood, so that's where a lot of that small pedestrian facility enhancement money has been used, just to fill in some of those gaps.
Okay, awesome, thanks. And then just a quick question on the De La Guerra Plaza revitalization project. So under the funding for that, it's Measure C and then grant. Does that imply that that's going to receive, or you're going, like the city's going to seek out grant funding for that unmet, like $3 million that are needed?
Yes, Committee Member Sanford, through the chair, that yes, right now, most of the monies have just gone through concept planning and design, but for the full reality of the project, they'll need a different funding source that hasn't been identified yet.
Okay, and so if the city doesn't find grant funding, is there a chance that they look at pulling that from their own capital budget?
That's a great question. That becomes, part of the process for city council to consider and to see if there's additional funding. Sometimes those may be pulled into Measure C, like the police station is an example, that's getting funding through there. So when other funding sources become not available, then that's when the discussions happen for other potential sources for funding. We generally try to, seek to try not to touch Measure C, to have it for maintaining existing infrastructure and seek grant funding elsewhere.
Thanks.
This is great to see, and it just, thanks to the voters for Measure C and for people who are buying things. and paying their sales tax. And while inflation is bad, it's good for sales tax receipts, it turns out. But having been on this committee so long, it was lean days to where like this was just like a futile exercise, really, in that when it was just streets, transportation, capital, which the numbers look a lot better, but like in the recession, it would be like, so there's $500,000. What do you think we should spend it on? And it would be like, I don't know, like a curb ramp or something, and that was it, really, you know. So, one, it's great news that the list is going down. There will always be more, of course. And two, like the way that staff programs these things and goes in order of, you know, focusing on safety, focusing on Vision Zero, focusing on the biggest needs. With the ATP funding, it's nice to see progress of like, our city really is getting safer, you know, for the most part. And it's, yeah, nice to see progress in kind of a fairly short window of time when it comes to like major public works progress generally. So it's great to see. It's good to see some of the things are still sticking around on there, and a few things jumped out to me of like, interesting, but could be exciting if we get to that. So the other thing I really appreciate is the outreach. I meant to say this on the last item, but the outreach that public works staff does on these projects, like the Castillo one, having the webinar, having the meeting out in the neighborhood, and I know like you'll do for these, like Las Positas and things like that, makes such a huge difference. I know it means a lot to the public, it means a lot to me, because I know you're gonna have the best project possible because you've done all that outreach. So it really pays off in the end. We've seen it go other ways, and unfortunately right now, you know, specifically on State Street, green bike lanes or, you know, pieces were taken out without any public process, and now it's kind of, a lot of people are upset, don't understand why, because there's no public process, and we're confused as to why safety things were taken out. So, roundabout way of saying, this department does a great job. Keep it up. We have so many good projects to work on, and hopefully the rest of the city organization can follow the model that you've always followed, at least for the last decade, to keep it going, so people are bought into the project, so they don't get blown up at the last minute with, you know, angry neighbors. So thanks for your work.
I just have one comment, you know, and it's in the context of longevity on the committee. Watching the development of grant monies and funding from all these wonderful sources we have, what I get in talking to people who don't know I'm on a committee at the city is complaints about why are the roads in Santa Barbara always being worked on? I couldn't get where I wanted to go. There was all this construction, rah, 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 rah. And I said, well, you know, we're really lucky that we have the money to do that. There was a time when we didn't. So that usually shuts them up. And I said, well, I'm on a committee that we discuss this, and it's really important that we fix your roads. And they go, oh, okay. But that's something as committee members we can do, is help people realize that all of these trucks and men and noise are helping us, so.
Thank you. We appreciate the committee being ambassadors for the projects.
Any other comments? My comment is basically that, you know, I think we look at each of these projects in hyper detail, and then you get a report like this, and you see all that's going on behind the scenes, and you just kind of zoom out for a second and see that how much is actually under scope, and how much attention to all of these individual things are, although they don't always surface in the meetings that we get. And so it's just kind of an opportunity to kind of communicate a sense of appreciation for all that the department does, and to have a document body like this to refer back to for all of it is within the purview of Public Works, and just to know what everything is going on behind the scenes. So thank you all.
I know I only got to ask questions, so I just want to give a few comments too. Kind of echoing what other committee members have said, but I think this is a really impressive collection of projects, and I'm so excited to see a lot of these come to fruition, and super grateful for Measure C and for your department's work in securing so much excellent grant funding around safety, everything from HSIP to ATP, just transforming Santa Barbara in a really good way. So thank you.
That means I think I need to say something about Vision Zero, because just so glad that that was adopted, by the city, and it's made such a difference in finding the intersections that were really dangerous, the places that had the most injuries, and then actually engineering it and making it, going to the neighborhood and making it work. And it's just been a tremendous change in the way the department operates, and I just appreciate it so much. It's done a lot for safety in our community.
Okay, well, thank you all for your feedback tonight, and yeah, we'll keep you apprised of the process, and once we have specific dates, we'll share that with you. Sometimes we do have the chair come to the various planning commission or city council just to speak on behalf of the program. And I think that's it. We've had a great 2-item discussion tonight. We knew it was going to be longer, so we really appreciate it. And again, for committee member Horn and Sanford, thank you so much for your time on this committee. And we will miss you. But I know that you are both amazing and do so many great things in the community, so it'll be fun to watch what the next plan of action is. All right, well, again, thank you for this evening, and I'll pass it back to Chair Malavos. Before I do that, just our next meeting won't be till February of 2023, unless there is something that comes up, and again, we'll be in touch via email if there's any outreach or key meetings that we need to know about, or if we have to have it out of sequence. But the next program one is 2023. So have wonderful holidays, and we'll be back in 2023.
All right, and I guess that just leaves with the motion to adjourn the meeting.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
All in favor? Aye.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.